The built-up anticipation in the time leading up to the release of Breath of the Wild was nothing short of insane, and with that came a popular new game to speedrun. Currently, with over 11,000 runs submitted by over 1,300 players, in the any percent category specifically, only 15 have been able to sit at the top over the course of the game's existence. That's about 1%. This is the story of those gamers and their incredible achievements. This is the history of Breath of the Wild any percent world records. Of course, I should address the elephant in the room before I dive in, because it wouldn't be right not to acknowledge being inspired by Summoning Salt to create this video. I noticed his channel has but one Zelda video published in the entire library, whereas there are multiple Mario and Punch-Out videos. I'm of the mindset that if the video you want to watch doesn't exist yet, nor is there evidence of it arriving on the horizon, then you must create it yourself so you and others can enjoy. And so here we are. The other major asterisk to mention is the rule for how to time runs and how it changed on the 28th of September 2018, about a year and a half after the game's release. Players used to hit the timer simultaneously while starting a new game, but now we start the timer upon gaining control of Link after the opening cutscene. The difference is about 1 minute and 7 seconds, and the reason for the change is because of the loading time inconsistencies during the intro between Wii U and the Switch, and even individual switches, as it was discovered the loading time could be manipulated before the run. Eventually, a subsequent rule requiring the game to be fully closed out before each new run would be enacted to further restrict preloading advantages/disadvantages. Some resources I've used to research for this documentary adjusted the times to what they would have been had the timer started at gaining control of Link, and others left the times as they were. To reflect accuracy of speedrunning history, I'll be using the original times, not the adjusted times, but I will make note of any significant changes that would have altered history had the rules been different at the time. For example, special minute barriers broken or other cool would-be achievements. And so with that, we're ready to begin. The first official world record was 2 hours, 22 minutes, and 46 seconds, set by the famous OG Minecraft YouTuber Seth Bling on the 3rd of March 2017, the day the game was released to the public. Though this is not the first documented completion of the game, as throughout his run we see a note in the corner showing the standing world record that day was 3 hours, 39 minutes, and 39 seconds by Orchestra, now known as Katie May. And this was the very first completed speedrun in this game's history. But because it was achieved before the game's official launch date, it was never submitted to the leaderboards. Seth Bling was given a brand new Switch and a copy of Breath of the Wild directly from Nintendo before the general public, and decided to pioneer the speedrun route with co-contributor Sockfolder. Seth even released a video 3 days before achieving his inaugural run, showing how to get from the Great Plateau to Hyrule Castle in 12 minutes. For those who are unaware, the idea of an any percent speedrun is, of course, to complete the main concluding goal of the game using any natural methods, regardless of how much of the actual game is unlocked, as fast as possible. For Breath of the Wild, beating the game is when you defeat the final boss, Dark Beast Ganon, and the only prerequisites to doing this are leaving the Great Plateau and defeating the other bosses that come before Dark Beast. We just went over how the timing begins, but how it ends has always been the same, on the first frame of the explosion after you shoot Dark Beast Ganon's eye. To leave the Great Plateau, you must complete the 4 shrines found there to acquire the 4 required rune abilities, your first 4 spirit orbs, and then collect the paraglider from King Rome boss Faramis Hyrule. There's no known way to get around getting the paraglider because the game has a 2-factor authentication, which constantly checks if it's in your inventory. Once you have the glider, you're free to go straight to the final fight, but without completing the 4 Divine Beast dungeons, you're greeted by the 4 Blight Ganons before the intense face-off against Calamity. Seth Bling's first official run was glitchless because nothing had been discovered yet, and it was also his first completed run and 7th overall attempt. The plateau route he ran was magnesis, cryonis, stasis, then bombs, which became standard for a short period of time. After finishing the plateau, he prayed to the goddess statue for another 5th of stamina. He ran by foot all the way across Hyrule Field to get to the castle, as opposed to taming a horse or scanning an amiibo for Epona. Once there, he climbed a guardian tower to get height, where he fumbled around and kept slipping, losing lots of time.
Did I run out of stamina again?
Inside the castle, he ran a route which is basically a backwards version of the current route, which we'll see later in the video. He lost a lot of time fighting moblins, but he still had an extremely smooth run for a first day world record until he got to the Sanctum and the final fights. After that, he died to Water Blight Ganon, the second of the 4 blights, which sends you all the way back to the start of the fights. So he took a bathroom break after that first death, and then went through all 4 blights on his second attempt, but died almost immediately to Calamity Ganon, which again sends you back to the start of the blight fights, an excruciating time loss.
The fire is too strong. It was just everywhere.
He died to Calamity 2 more times before finally making it to Dark Beast, which acts as a checkpoint. He then lost a little more time in Dark Beast Ganon by missing a few shots and also losing his horse, which created a scenario right up to the end where he had to bait for a laser to get an updraft because you must shoot from the air to hit the final eye. Firing from the ground will have it retract back inside for safety. There was still tons of room for time save in Seth's run. He even listed a personal goal of achieving an hour and a half, which was easily possible without the major time losses he sustained. Now that everyone had access to the game and saw what was possible, his world record wouldn't stand for long, being beaten in less than 24 hours by Venick. Seth Bling would never reclaim the top spot, making him one of only 4 gamers to achieve the world record only once. Still, being the first person to clinch the title and his contributions to pushing the game in its earliest days cemented him in Zelda speedrunning history. The follow-up run by Venick to dethrone Seth shaved an insane 58 minutes and 40 seconds off of Seth Bling's time. This first bop of the current world record would go on to be the largest, breaking the 2-hour barrier and bringing the new world record down to 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 7 seconds. We never have and never will see such a significant record reduction in this game. Venick achieved this run still using no glitches. He lost time by falling to his death off the Sheikah Tower, but showed optimizations on the way to bombs by walking on top of the wall to avoid a cutscene where the Guardian wakes up, and changed the routing on Plateau to bombs, magnesis, cryonis, stasis. Inside magnesis, instead of the intended strategy, he used an interesting technique to jump across the gap, blowing Link up to get the distance, because shield jumping still hadn't been discovered. And after completing Plateau, also opted for another 5th of Stamina Vessel. And to get to the castle, he scanned an amiibo to summon Epona immediately, saving significant time over Seth's strategy, but then got shot by a Guardian and sent all the way back to the base of the plateau and had to run it back again.
I was about to pause and save.
He made it up that Guardian pillar Seth stumbled on much faster and cleaner both times, and also took out all the enemies around the castle much cleaner. But then got hung up, losing a lot of time leaving Zelda's study to get to the Sanctum, climbing up over the tower.
Oh, I got fucked though. That can happen where it's just like, oh, let me just not actually, oh my god.
When he made it to the Sanctum, he was 9 minutes ahead of Seth Bling's first run. And on first attempt of the fights, he made it all the way to the last hit or so of Thunderblight. Before getting lasered to death.
Welcome to Breath of the Wild 90%.
This was his only death during the fights, saving an immense amount of time over the reigning world record.
Come on, come on. Yes, 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 yes.
He also saved time in Dark Beast Ganon by getting cleaner shots on the targets. However, he lost time at the very end by thinking you needed an updraft to shoot the final eye, but really all you need to do is be airborne, so he could have jumped straight off the horse's back a little sooner to finish the run instead of running around trying to bait for another laser to get that updraft.
Fire your laser? Here we go.
But none of that mattered very much because 3 days later, Venick would improve on his own personal record, simultaneously bringing the world record down to 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 17 seconds. He saved time by picking up less backup food at the start and grabbing the Boko shield from the bokoblin outside the tower for shield surfing, which saved tons of time, especially while traversing the cold area from Cryonis to Stasis. This movement strat would become a runner favorite for the next little while, and still mostly glitchless, but this was also the first run to use a major glitch runners still use to this day, whistle sprinting. Whistle sprinting allows you to run at about 80% of the regular sprinting speed while the stamina replenishes, making for a huge advantage. Instead of blowing himself up to cross the gap in Magnesis, he was now using a jump slash technique, but he did implement a shield jump to cross the gap of the broken bridge on the way to Cryonis, which previous runs did by just timing a regular leap. Instead of scanning an amiibo to summon Epona, he opted to grab a wild horse found at the base of the plateau, but lost time because he didn't land right on its back and had to sneak around a bit. He then got lasered by a guardian close to Castletown, just like in the previous record, but had time to save right before it happened, so he didn't lose nearly as much time as he did in the previous record, learning from his mistake.
Fucking later, nerd. Dead.
He also chose not to run quite as high up the Guardian pillar, saving time, and cleaned up strats in the guards chamber, getting a sneak strike on the Moblin for the first time in a world record. After that, the route changes a bit to hit the first gatehouse, instantly kill the Lionel with an ancient arrow and pick up an additional 10 bomb arrows before running up the stairs to Zelda's bedroom, where the Moblin took Link's life with a single swing for another small time loss. He brought out all new fight strats for Water and Fire Blight Ganons, where it's possible to recognize the very beginnings of the modern weapon routing strategies. Weapon routing is when you have a clear battle plan of which weapons to use for specific portions of the fight, how many hits to deal with them, and so on. But the Wind and Thunderblight strats are very primitive and lose a lot of time in comparison. After making it through the Blight segment, he was 20 minutes and 47 seconds ahead of his current world record. The battle with Calamity was intense, he had to leave the game plan and go all out, but he made it through. And after saving some time in Dark Beast Ganon by not waiting for a laser and just jumping from the horse as soon as the eye appears, learning from his mistake from last time, finished just barely 5 minutes over an hour. Of course, this world record wasn't destined to stand for long because it took the possibility of achieving a sub 1 hour run from being merely within sight to now being within reach. And about a day and a half later, on the 6th day since Breath of the Wild's release, that's exactly what happened. Well, sort of. Orchestra was the next runner to achieve the world record, reclaiming it in a way, and would have been the first runner to break the hour barrier because of what we already went over about the change in rules for starting the timer. If we had always started it when gaining control of Link, this run would have been a 59:41. But because of the way things were done in the early days, the official time is 1 hour and 50 seconds. Orchestra did the same plateau route as Venick, but saved time by introducing a tricky jump when warping back to the tower after completing the bomb shrine and landing in some water. However, they lost time in Magnesis by falling into the water for not only the first time in a world record, but also the second. And another first was going for the shield jump to cross the gap, which would become the standard until wind bombs would eventually take over. There was also time loss in stasis with an unfortunate incident where Link was killed by a giant ball rolling down the chute.
Oh my god, no.
And then on the way to Castle, scanning an amiibo for Epona, flawlessly ran across Hyrule Field to save tons of time over the previous record. And this kind of established a beginning of the pattern between amiibo and no amiibo runs. For the most part, they've been very similar routes throughout history and strategies and all that, but using amiibos has always been a bit faster, and sometimes the routes would branch off at the castle mostly. I'll talk more about that later. Orchestra lost time in the guards chambers when Link was killed by Lizalfos twice, but saved time by disposing of both moblins in a way that just knocked them down and made them drop their swords rather than going as far as to kill them, entering the fights with 42 minutes and 8 seconds on the clock, only 22 seconds ahead of the standing world record from Venick. While the Blight's fights were mostly comparable, it was Calamity where the time was saved by playing much more aggressively, using laser parries and repelling some wall attacks to keep him on the ground. You see, when Calamity goes on the wall, that's bad for speedrunning. It's an extremely entertaining Calamity fight to watch, especially knowing the early day strategies mostly favored caution rather than aggression, so it's just fun to watch. Then in the Dark Beast fight came another unfortunate time loss when Orchestra kept missing the rear ankle shot on the target on the first side. Which, those of you who know, it's not an intuitive shot. The actual hitbox is on the cleft of the leg, and you have to aim a little lower than what you would think. Anyway, Zelda couldn't hold it anymore, and we had to wait for the targets to appear again.
Did that work?
But when it was all said and done, Orchestra had two huge achievements, both of them unofficial. The first ever completed run, and by today's standards, the first sub 1 hour. And the next day, they lowered the record even more, down to 1 hour and 11 seconds, just shy of that monumental sub 1 hour goal with the timing rules at the time. However, later that same day, Breath of the Wild was beaten in under 1 hour by another runner. Lowering Orchestra's time by 2 minutes and 10 seconds was Gymnast86 with a time of 58:01. He used the same exact strategies but played much cleaner to finish Plateau in 25 minutes and 18 seconds, then chose not to scan the amiibo to spawn Epona, opting for a wild horse at the base of the plateau, and landed straight on it, saving the time over Venick's no amiibo run from a couple world records ago. He lost a little bit of time in the fights, mostly to missed flurry rushes against Thunderblight, which, as we'll talk more about, we don't do flurry rushes with Thunderblight anymore, that's a backup strat at best. But for a long time with Thunderblight, runners would opt for a defense strategy and let Thunderblight take the lead, and then go in with counterattacks when possible. In any case, overall, the fights were solid. He went on to finish with a strong Dark Beast Ganon slaying. However, after the belly shot, he was thrown from the horse because Dark Beast Ganon's right rear hoof stepped on him a little bit, or it's actually more accurate to say his horse's hoof stepped on Dark Beast Ganon. Then as he raced to catch and remount on his horse, Dark Beast Ganon started turning away, so he lost a bit of time getting back to the front of the eye shot. And when he hit it, he turned his mic back on, and the only words he's heard saying during the entire video of the run is,
"That was a bad run."
Which it was not, because not only was it the first sub 1 hour run, it was also the first deathless. Although he cut it real close inside Cryonis after almost freezing to death on the way there and then getting shot by the robot making his way up top. But I believe that little bit of bad luck at the very end probably made it feel more that way. 2 days later, Venick would reclaim the record by shaving nearly 4 minutes off the time with a 54:05. At this point, an MO for the beginning of the run had been established. He then saved time with new strats in the guards chambers, using an arrow to distract the Lizalfos and bring them together for the slaughter. He then used a whistle to distract the moblin so he could sneak strike him. These new strategies reduced the need for quote-unquote luck by minimizing the possibility of attack RNG. In other words, not having to deal with the random attacks enemies throw at you, making things easier, faster, and saving weapon durability. This was also the first Calamity fight where a stun lock was executed on phase 2. Stun locking is when you slam a two-handed weapon coming out of a spin attack at the right moment, and as Calamity tries to get up, he falls back down. Although this time it wasn't followed up with anything more than just dealing a few more extra hits while Calamity stayed on the ground a little longer, then letting him back up and baiting him for another laser parry attack. And while this sped up the Calamity battle by a significant margin, it's unclear whether or not this was intentional or just luck and a way of early discovery happening in the moment. Either way, he followed up the Calamity with the strongest Dark Beast Ganon fight yet, and while the ending cutscene played, he talked about moving on to other categories like all dungeons, and predicted that someone would be able to bring the any percent world record down below 50 minutes before the end of the month. And spoiler alert, he was correct. Venick and Gymnast would trade back and forth an additional 4 times in the next 5 days, making it the first quote-unquote battle between 2 top runners, of which we'll see several as the years go on. Gymnast took it back by using a new strategy of grabbing a handful of bladed rhino beetles to make an attack-up elixir to help speed up the fights later on. He also changed the Great Plateau route from the established Bombs Magnesis Cryonis Stasis to Mag Bombs Cryostasis, a route we hadn't seen yet. Although similar enough to the way runners were already doing it, this would become the new standard route, because it eliminates the need to warp back to the tower after bombs and has minimal backtracking. And with this plateau route, he finished with a 25:02. He also sort of pioneered a new castle route in this one, entering through an open doorway known today as the Copium Backup route, something not seen since Orchestra's first speedrun before the game was actually out. This put him at the opposite end of the hallway runners would usually approach from, so he had to use bomb arrows on the Lizalfos instead of sneak striking. But this also lit the cooking pot, and fun fact, for the first ever Mighty Attack Up recipe in a world record run, we got a critical boost in the attack up time. And the recipe was 2 beetles, a Lizalfos Talon, and Tail, netting 11 minutes and 40 seconds of extra strength. He entered the fights at 36 minutes and 54 seconds, nearly a minute behind world record pace. But with clean fight strats and the Mighty Elixir, it was enough to give him the edge and finish with a 53:13. Nice. The next day, Venick would take the record back with a 52:37, and obviously at this point in time, the run was still extremely primitive as the game had only been out for 12 days. Now optimizations like boulder skip inside stasis, and although he didn't move fast enough to nail the trick, we see an attempt to get the first cycle in stasis as well, which is when you move fast enough to freeze the boulder at the top of the chute so there's no need to wait for it to roll past. The only major change in this run was taking a different path on horseback on the way to the castle, heading straight through Castletown to grab a sword, then heading through the front gates, and he also opted to keep the detour to Zelda's room for extra supplies. Unfortunately, he quickly died to Wind Blight by firing a bomb arrow too close and getting caught up in his own explosion.
Oh.
After that, he was inspired to get world record with this run not despite its flaws, but because of them.
This run's a joke, let's get world record with it. I really want the record now with this run. That would be so funny. And I know I can still get it.
He then got a few double hits on Fireblight, but again, in these early days, it looks as though this was unintentional and just lucky placement for the spin attack, because we don't see him setting double hits up anywhere else, but this could also be the purposeful implementation of a strategy, but just not using it at every opportune moment. And speaking of spin attacks, this is the first time we see a Calamity stun lock used properly, keeping him down until the swords on hand are too low on durability. This strat is a Calamity game changer and is no doubt what gave this run the edge for a new world record. Over the next 24 hours or so, 4 different people would hold this record. Orchestra with a 52:25, then Gymnast with a 51:40 would reclaim, Then a new runner named Balton achieved his only world record, a 51:30, which was overtaken by Orchestra again with a 51:18, about 4 hours later, making Balton the player to hold the record for the least amount of time. And finally, Venick took back the title with a 50:17. But it was the run Venick achieved the next day that finally broke the 50-minute barrier with a 49:43.
Sub 50. 49:43.
He made no changes to plateau, just played clean, still primitively running through the shrines for the most part, and finishing with a 24:09 plateau, followed up by super clean horse riding to the castle, and on his approach to the sanctum after leaving Zelda's room, started getting some loading glitches.
Oh my god, texture glitch? Is this a joke? Fucking goddamn it.
This was actually quite common on earlier versions of the game, and it looks cool, but it can also make things more difficult if you use certain visual cues you can no longer see. Back in these days, runners would hide in the corner behind the pillars to avoid Thunderblight's throws and rush attacks. And if you can't see the pillars, that's a problem. Venick lost a lot of time due to Thunderblight rushing in too high to be hit with a spin attack, which he claimed was RNG, again meaning random chance, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe players have since discovered a proper reason for why Thunderblight may levitate a bit higher. And this would be the last time Venick ever held the world record.
What a good run. Enjoy the drama.
The very next day, the top spot belonged to somebody else, a runner by the name of SVA, who achieved a 47:59 with the same exact strats pulled off with cleaner execution, getting a 24-minute and 11-second plateau. This would be the last world record to include the step where you jump down to pray to the goddess statue for an extra 5th of stamina. It was a no amiibo run, opting for a wild horse to get to castle, and once there, implementing small optimizations, throwing bombs down the hall while sneak striking the Lizalfos and stuff like that. Entering the fights at 35 minutes and 1 second. Water and fire blights are clearly in the early phases of what will eventually become their modern day optimizations, while Phase 1 Calamity still looks like a player's choice of what to do to survive and get the job done as fast as possible, but for Phase 2 Calamity, during this period of speedrunning, SVA had perfect execution, getting the instant laser and flawless stun lock and everything. And the Dark Beast segment was fantastic. This was the first run to demonstrate control of Dark Beast with strategic movement to instantly get clean shots as opposed to letting him turn into Link and block all the good angle shots for a moment. SVA's record would stand for about 3 days before being beaten twice by Orchestra with a 47:09, then again the next day with a 46:39. But later that same day, March 23rd, 2017 to be exact, so only 20 days that the game has been out so far, SVA would take the title right back with a 45:51. Then on day 21, along came Chaotic Ace, who, with his first world record, would shave 20 seconds off SVA's time, bringing it down to a 45:32. By this point, runners had discovered jump canceling, the act of jumping after swinging a weapon to cancel the rest of the swing animation after contact. A simple yet extremely advantageous strategy in many situations throughout the rest of the history of the game. And it's not even a glitch, it's just how Breath of the Wild works. Ace did, however, implement another new strategy that is a glitch, and one that runners still use to this day, the fall damage cancel. It's a way of tricking the game into thinking Link was closer to the ground than he actually is, so he doesn't get hurt while landing from huge jumps. This saves so much time because now players no longer needed to tediously climb down from high places. With this new movement, Ace would get a 23:34 plateau, the fastest plat yet. But still, it's funny how the world record for the full run has been faster than this for a while now. Anyway, he entered the Sanctum about 10 minutes and 5 seconds later at 33:39. In his video description notes, he's written slowish calamity and blights. But as far as the slowish calamity and blights, for the period this run was achieved, I'd say this is being overly critical of oneself. something speedrunners tend to do quite often, as he finished Calamity 22 seconds faster than he ever had in his life.
Let's go! Yes! Dude, fuck yes!
That record would stand for about 3 days until being beaten by another runner named Icatrix. However, Icatrix's first world record was overshadowed because it took an additional 2 days to get verified, and by that time it had already been smashed by Chaotic Ace, reclaiming the title once again with a 43:33. Icatrix was the first world record holder to do a stasis launch to quickly travel from the stasis shrine over to the Temple of Time. During these days, this trick was known as a super speed launch, or SSL for short. And it was also the first to run a completely new castle route, traveling over to the right side instead of the left, which required another stasis launch to surf on a rock slab to enter a tower where you'll find some item boxes. This infamous castle route wouldn't immediately catch on, but once it did, a modified version of it would be standard for years as the No Amiibo route, specifically known as Banana Castle, because inside one of these boxes is a chance to receive mighty bananas. But since it's purely RNG, most runners would usually save before breaking the box, so if they didn't get the bananas they could reload and try again. But as you can see, Icatrix didn't save and didn't get bananas, so it's a prime example right off the bat of the problem I just described. Luckily, in these early days, he was able to keep the run alive by grabbing the assured bananas in the dining hall. He then ran down the hall, blew up a wall, collected a sword, disarmed a Lizalfos for its weaponry, dropped down, took out a moblin, got some more weapons and the guts, before climbing back up and returning to the dining hall, distracting to take out the 2 moblins by the cooking pot, taking the stone smasher and other guts, and cooking up an attack meal. The ingredients now collected yield a level 2 attack up elixir. Every world record before this used a level 1. After all this, he ran back down the castle's hallway to sprint to the observation room, destroying 2 Malice eyeballs to gain access to the balcony for more weaponry, before meeting back up with the known route of hitting the first gatehouse, taking the Lionel out with an ancient arrow, picking up the 10 bomb arrows, and going up to Zelda's room and from there to the Sanctum. It's a shame this run wasn't more well known at the time because of how pioneering it was. Another first was how Icatrix dealt with the Blights. With Thunder Blight, specifically Phase 2, he opted for more aggression and gave us the first showing of a more optimal strategy used today. Then he took out Phase 1 Calamity with a primitively pulled off strategy that became the standard eventually. Getting in some hits, then running to the wall for bomb arrows, strafing to the left while firing headshots the best you can until you get the Royal Claymore, and going from there. But although this record was short-lived, Icatrix would soon return to achieve more great things. The 43:33 by Chaotic Ace that overshadowed Icatrix's run was the first to ever optimize the old man chat after completing the first shrine. The ideal way to do this is to choose options 2, 1, 1, and then 2. This gives you less text to skip through. Until now, everyone just mashed through option 1. It's a small yet free time save that everyone does to this day. Another first seen in this run was the use of Amiibo to collect fish for the attack up meal. In one scan, Ace got 3 porgies and 2 carp. Basically a perfect drop because you can only cook 5 items at a time and these are all mighty ingredients. Regardless, he chose to leave the carp. Maybe this was because there's a 2-second time loss for the text box whenever you pick up new items, or more likely perhaps he chose 3 fish with the beetle plus a monster part to make the first ever level 3 attack up elixir. But runners would soon learn that if you're scanning for fish, you might as well just pick up more of those and then you don't need to grab the beetle or the monster part. In the fights, now with double hits, you see he was setting them up, but not the way we do in modern times. He'd start by getting regular hits and then slide Link around to get the doubles, as opposed to setting them up straight away. Again, just another piece of evidence showing early understanding of the game's mechanics and the glitches that would eventually become much better understood, as we'll see. Anyway, it was with this run that a massive increase in world record optimization had begun. Between Chaotic Ace and Gymnast86, over the next 2 weeks, trading the record back and forth with another battle, would bring the time down an additional 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Looking at the graph of world record progression, this marks the bottom of the curve, where more real time begins passing between each new record, which shaves less and less time off the speedrun, and the data goes from a vertical formation to horizontal. On April Fool's Day 2017, Chaotic Ace would do it again with a 7-second personal best new world record. He lost significant time in the Stasis Shrine by missing the jump around the boulder with only one heart, so when he fell into the abyss, he had to start at the beginning of the shrine and do it all over again, but won some time back with a new stasis launch off plateau into the middle of Hyrule Field. And I know I've said similar things throughout the video, but by this run, the Blight's fights have really taken shape. With the exception of Windblight, who will eventually be completely skipped, you can clearly see how future runners would learn from and improve upon the battle plan taking shape. The following day, Gymnast would bring the record down another minute and 2 seconds with a 42:24, calling it his first decent run. The most noticeable things about this run are that it was his second world record run of the day, first achieving a 42:59, then continuing in the session to do more attempts. And then I just think it's cool how the final time, minute, and second numbers mirror each other. Other than that, all the same strats we've seen and talked about from Chaotic Ace were used, just more efficiently with cleaner execution. And speaking of Chaotic Ace, efficiency, and clean execution, shortly after Gymnast finally got his first decent run, Ace returned with a 42:20, lowering the top time by 4 seconds. No matter though, because the next evening was the 3rd of April 2017, the 1-month anniversary since Breath of the Wild's release, and Gymnast would reclaim the top spot by a mere 3 seconds. He was behind the entire run until having an exceptional Calamity fight for those days, finishing with a time of 42:17. And by the next afternoon, Gymnast had done it yet again with a new minute barrier broken. After chipping away at the 42-minute zone for a while, he barely broke into the 41s with a 41:59. No new strats, just better execution. Then over the next 6 days, Icatrix would return to lower the time by about 6 seconds with 2 new records. The first, another 41:59, lowering the time by a mere 15 milliseconds, and the second bringing it down to 41:53. And people, let me tell you, Icatrix was an innovator. This third world record under his belt brought more new optimizations. Instead of throwing and blowing up bombs in the bomb shrine, he destroyed the first 2 walls by dropping them behind Link as he moved forward to optimize movement. Then in the Cryonis shrine, he did something I'd never seen or heard of before researching this video. Up until now, everyone had just run through the shrine as intended, but he used a cryo block to get up on top of the gate, then raised it with another cryo block, which gave him enough height to leap over the wall straight to the monk. I imagine this blew people's minds back in the day before anyone had seen wind bombs or other Cryonis tricks, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. To get back to the Temple of Time for the paraglider, he implemented the first ever tree stasis launch straight to the roof. And finished plateau in 23 minutes and 8 seconds. He then went on to perform a modified version of the Banana Castle route, which so far he was the only one to try, but this would eventually become the standard. Skipping the tower with the banana box entirely and stasis launching from Castletown straight to the dining hall to grab the bow from the chandelier, and then grabbing the sword behind the wall, distracting the Lizalfos instead of attacking it before dropping down to slay the moblin, grab the bow, shield, sword, destroying the boxes in the corner, which have a bunch of different elemental and regular arrow RNG, then climbing back up and sneak striking that Lizalfos you distracted earlier to collect his weapon. But perhaps the most impressive change to the route was heading out onto the dining hall balcony after cooking the meal, scanning an amiibo to drop metal boxes, and using those to stasis launch high into the air, giving enough height to paraglide straight to the sanctum, entering the fights at 31 minutes and 13 seconds. But despite all these time-saving maneuvers, he lost a lot of time in Phase 1 Calamity and was able to hold on and snag out a top time, bringing it down to 41:53. A true top-tier gamer. 3 days later, Chaotic Ace would shave 28 more seconds off the record to hold it for a final time in his speedrunning endeavors. This was the first world record run to attempt a cryo skip, which would eventually become the top runner staple for years. The cryo skip is when you use a Cryonis block to boost Link up as you surf and jump to get a little bit of extra height. You can cut across a section of the shrine here, but it's precise, and if you mess it up, you just gotta run around and you lose time. As seen here, he didn't nail the landing, but still the first time we'd seen this strategy thrown into the mix of tricks. In the next record, set 5 days later, Icatrix went for the same cryo skip and also missed it, but opted to try again, marking the first time the trick was successfully pulled off in a world record. Although, as I just explained, with the time loss there messing up put him in the red, where he'd remain until fighting much cleaner fights, including a golden Calamity and getting back in the green to secure a new PB. And within 24 hours of that, Icatrix would break the last minute barrier of the 40s, when he achieved a 40:57. Over the next 5 days, he ground the time down further to 40:18 by cleaning up strats he'd been using all along. And he continued cleaning up those strats over the next 3 days to bring the record down through the 40s into the 30s with a 39:57. At this point, the first collective mental and physical block was in front of the Breath of the Wild speedrunning world, as this world record would go on to stand for 3 months, the longest a record had stood yet by a gigantic margin. It wouldn't be until the 27th of July 2017 when Orchestra would come back to reclaim the title with a 39:35. This was a monumental moment in any percent history for Breath of the Wild. After a long wait between new records, it's unclear why Icatrix's first sub-40 run never got that much more attention. It currently has 63.4 thousand views on YouTube, whereas Orchestra's run has 1.1 million. To achieve this run, Orchestra jumped on board with Icatrix's castle route, playing super smooth, especially after Plateau, and getting excellent RNG with fish and arrow drops.
Perfect, yes.
One major change from Icatrix's methods was to strategically place the iron box on the balcony for launching up to Sanctum and giving it an upward angle with an arrow shot rather than blowing a bomb underneath it. This not only saved a good amount of time over the setup, but also crouching and firing arrow into the corner of boulders and boxes for stasis launches would eventually become a staple in future runs. This, however, would be the final time Orchestra would ever hold the world record. Icatrix would answer back about a week and a half later by bringing the time down another 10 seconds to 39:25, experimenting with a totally new Great Plateau route never seen before of Magnesis, Cryonis, Stasis bombs. And while this route wouldn't go on to become the accepted standard, finishing Plateau with bombs eventually would. So this is the first time we see the tree launch to the roof of Temple of Time from the field down below, a much more impressive launch than the original Temple of Time tree launch. And speaking of launches, Icatrix would use the Orchestra setup for the box launch up to the Sanctum as well. And as fate would have it, this accomplishment from Icatrix would become another long-standing world record, making the previous gap of 3 months between New Better Times a little paler in comparison. We're talking about 7 months. It was the last world record of 2017, and the last world record held by Icatrix. It wouldn't be until Breath of the Wild's first birthday on March 3rd, 2018 when we'd see a new world record being held by a new person, a runner by the name of Wolhayek Song, but most people just call him Song. Song was the first world record holder to wait a moment after speaking with the monk at the end of each shrine to get a free time save in the loading screen while going back to the overworld. He did the same plateau and castle routes as the previous record, although this one wouldn't stand for nearly as long. Still, as we'll see, Song would go on to be one of the most dominant runners of 2018 and 2019, engaging in several back and forth battles with other top runners. And one of those runners would be the next to claim the top spot when Rosin Earns got his first world record with a time of 38:49 on the 16th of May 2018. Rosin Earns, Rosin Runs. Rosin had already been grinding and experimenting with different ways of doing things to innovate known strategies, such as improving speed with stasis launches, reducing lag, and optimal movement techniques, etc. He got a perfect tree launch up to the bomb shrine. He launched off the plateau with a downed tree trunk rather than the farther away boulder everyone else had been using. And his movement inside the castle was fluid. In the Sanctum, the Blight's fights were incredible. And although weapon routing had been in play for a while, Rosin truly showed an intelligent thought process to how and when to use each weapon in his inventory. Same with Calamity. However, he shied away from trying to parry laser blasts in Phase 1, which lost him a good chunk of time. Still, the beginning of his Calamity fight was the best example yet of how runners would eventually opt to get the job done. The next day, another runner named Lulu Core would grab the world record when he achieved a time of 38:46, beating Rosin's time by 3 seconds. He'd even go on after the finish to say he felt bad because Rosin had just gotten his time after working so hard for it.
I feel sorry for Rosin, they got it like yesterday.
But as I alluded to a moment ago, Rosin will go on to be one of the most dominant Breath of the Wild players in the game's history, so believe me, we'll see him again. Lulu Core, however, would only hold the record this one time. He chose to scan an amiibo to drop boxes right at the base of the Temple of Time ruins and got an impressively fast and far launch, the best anyone had ever seen. Between the faster setup time and how deep into Hyrule Field he landed, this was a huge time save over all previous runs.
Oh, that's a good launch. Oh, that's a good launch. Holy shit, dude! Holy shit, dude!
Did you get a SSL?
A natural SSL, yeah?
What the fuck? No way. That's so dumb, dude. That's the most random thing I've
That's
seen.
the most random
ever.
SSL ever.
Wow.
If I've done my research properly, this is the first run to use throw sprinting, an alternative to whistle sprinting that keeps Link silent and avoids alerting nearby enemies. During this period of time, throw sprinting would have been considered inconsistent because it doesn't reliably replenish stamina the way whistle sprinting does, but eventually a runner named Skedadara, who we'll meet very soon, would popularize a throw sprinting technique that gets equal consistency to whistle sprinting. Anyway, this run would stand for about 12.5 days, until Song would come back to beat it by about 12.5 seconds. The most notable change here was this was the first run to use fire in the Moblin Room to ignite a pile of leaves under the boxes of arrows so you can ride the gust of air back up top instead of having to climb, which depletes all of Link's stamina and slows him down to a walk. So this change is not only faster, it looks way cooler. Song would go on to PB 4 more times in the next 3 months and breaking 3 new minute barriers in the process, bringing the world record from a 38:17 down to a 35:48. He got the first ever 37, a 37:51 to be exact, simply by playing well and getting great Calamity RNG. Then 2.5 months later, he'd break the 37-minute barrier with a time of 36:40, and to do that required a new trick called clipping through walls, which in turn would lead to a complete overhaul of nearly the entire route, taking Breath of the Wild speedrunning into a new era where runs would get faster, more difficult, and way more fun to watch. Up to this point, we've covered the earliest, most primitive era of records, spanning from early March 2017 through mid-September 2018. In that time, we've seen 11 top-tier gamers grind the world record down from 2 hours, 22 minutes, and 46 seconds to 36:40. Picking up from here, it's time to enter into what I call the era of major movement glitches. It'll take us from the first world record set using wall clips to complete the Great Plateau, through the discovery of bullet time
Like,
bounces,
when someone kills a run, you don't be.
wind bombs,
I've been getting okay RNG, and that's why I have been streaming for long.
and the bow lift smuggle slide. The discovery of clipping through walls led to a cascade of new experimentation. Now that runners could leave the Shrine of Resurrection without going through the front door, could they enter shrines without using the doors too? The answer, of course, is yes. Luckily, Nintendo never anticipated players would be able to do this, so they left the elevator platforms inside the shrines active, even without activating the towers. This means not only would players save time by not having to sit through the cutscene of Link looking out at Hyrule for the first time, but also not having to activate the Great Plateau Tower, which had up until this point always been the first major objective in the run. Not only this, but skipping the initial overworld title shot cutscene also keeps the time frozen at 5:15 AM and the weather always sunny, so consistent lighting would now be a thing, helping make some setups and visual cues possible. Not to mention not having to deal with style enemies or keys if the run goes to nighttime, or the chance of rain while trying to climb walls outside at the castle. And since stasis launches were still the fastest way to cover ground, while experimenting the reroute of Plateau, getting the stasis rune as soon as possible was heavily desired. As I mentioned a moment ago, Song was the first runner to snag a new world record using the infamous stasis first route, arguably the most beloved Great Plateau route, second maybe only to the currently used at the time of this video, Bomb's first route. That said, the Shrine of Resurrection scope clip wasn't always what it is today. For a while, runners had to push boxes up against the wall so they could hop on top of those and scope clip through the hallway wall, rather than from the Room of Resurrection. The benefit, as I just mentioned, is that it's faster than going through all the cutscenes and whatnot. The drawback was that it sucked to push the boxes around. This new stasis first route goes stasis, cryonis, magnesis, and then bombs, and would become the standard for the next several years. In its early days, there were some detours like grabbing extra hammers and stuff like that for the strategies of the time, notably still the stasis launches, which used a lot of durability, and of course these will eventually be phased out. The shrines are entered using shield clips, not a scope clip like in the Shrine of Resurrection. Shield clips require a glitched state called skew, where when Link does a shield jump, his animation is corrupted and the game can get confused as to which side of the wall he's on, and so it pushes him through to the other side. After finishing stasis, 3 launches were needed just to get from there to the Cryonis Shrine. And getting from cryo to mag took another 2 to 3 tree launches depending on how much durability you'd feel comfortable using up or what kind of launches you got. One super unfortunate time loss in this run would be getting bonked by the metal slab inside the Magnesis Shrine while dropping through.
What? No way. The door killed me?
However, he did save a little bit of time by optimizing movement through the block wall by getting closer to it and walking while holding the metal block, which easily pushes the stone out of the way. No one else had thought to do that until now. To move from the mag shrine to bombs, Song did a stasis launch using the metal plank underwater next to the shrine. This is much easier and more consistent than using the box, which would eventually become a crowd favorite top runner strat known as box walk. Again, as we'll see coming soon. Once across the river, it was one more tree launch to get to the bomb shrine.
My first 2 clips were like really good, so this still run.
If you're at all familiar with Breath of the Wild speedrunning, you may have noticed all these clips to get into the shrines for the first world record to implement them are exactly the same as they are today. The Cryonis clip is only used by newer runners, while top runners opt to do the extended shield clip straight through the front door, something that during the time was not discovered yet, but the other three are using the exact same technique, albeit just with different skew setups because of route changes and all that stuff. After entering the bomb shrine, the run would follow the established plateau strats of the time, running through to the monk, and then mashing through the old man's text, make your way out to the tree in the field, with another stasis launch to the Temple of Time. After the plateau, due to an increase in understanding of stasis launches, horses were no longer necessary to cross Hyrule Field, thus eliminating another part of the run most people considered lame and replacing it with cool movement and broken physics. It took 4 launches to get to the castle, and along the way, Song grabbed the Phantom Greaves from a DLC treasure chest for extra attack-up help. The way he played the castle segment was also unique, opting to collect everything he needed from the dining hall, including cooking up the elixir,
Let's go. That's what I'm talking about.
before moving down the hall and down to the Moblin room. Then, with no need to go back up, he ran through the doors down the hall to the library, taking out a Lizalfos in there to collect a boomerang before launching straight up through a hole in the ceiling to arrive right in front of the sanctum. I should also mention this was a no amiibo run played on the Wii U. That said, the fights went well enough to finish over a minute ahead of his PB from 2.5 months ago and break the 37-minute barrier, achieving a 36:40. One other thing that needs mentioning for the biggest Zelda nerds out there watching is you may have noticed the Sheikah text at the bottom of Song's game display. Yeah, I did too. And when translated, it says, clipping. Obviously a reference to the new glitch. So now, armed with that new glitch, and therefore a new drive to continue grinding, Song would go on to break the 36-minute barrier a week and a half later with a 35:48. It's possible during this time he achieved other non-submitted personal bests or world records, because Song was running against a 36:07, not the 36:40. But this could have just been a personal choice to run against another comparison. Anyway, there were no major changes, only better gaming. One thing that did change is the Sheikah text below the game display, which when transliterated now says consistency, which I would argue is the secret to success in all aspects of life, not just speedrunning, but I digress. This record would only stand for 5 days, but collectively, Song had achieved a 5-time new record streak, the longest consecutive single-player record improvement succession yet. The runner to break Song's streak would be Rosin when he returned to the top spot with a 35:08 on the 26th of September.
But finally.
Funny enough, I mentioned how Rosin would eventually develop the Gamer Boko Shield strat, which we will eventually see implemented in runs, but in his first PB running this new Stasis First route, grabbing the pot lid, he also developed the standard way to climb the rock to approach the second Boko camp. Pretty amazing stuff when you think about it. I said before, and I'll say it again, Rosin grinded, experimented, and pioneered countless strategies throughout the history of Breath of the Wild speedrunning, and made tremendous contributions. The main difference between Rosin's run and Song's was that it was amiibo versus no amiibo. Rosin used the amiibo to get attack up fish, a metal box to launch off the plateau, Epona, and then another metal box to launch up to the sanctum. All in, it was an excellent run that could have been the first sub 35 had he gotten slightly better arrow RNG. But it didn't really matter because 2 days later a significant rule change was enacted that had it been in there from the start, sub 35 would have happened a long time ago. Runners would now start the timer at the exact moment of gaining control of Link instead of at the moment they selected New Game. I mentioned this rule change at the beginning of the video, but again, the reasoning for it was because of inconsistent loading times between the Wii U and the Switch versions of the game, and also runners discovered you could sit through the intro and exit back to the title screen, and when you select New Game again, the loading times would be even faster. And not only that, but simply sitting on the title screen for a while would help quicken the load times because of how many game resources automatically begin loading as soon as you boot up the game. This is called preloading. So now there's no incentive to preload the game, and this decision to change when timing begins would save about 1 minute and 2 to 10 seconds, and while someone went and retroactively adjusted most, but not all of the past times to reflect the new rule, I find it more accurate to leave things as they were because we eventually found ways to cut other cutscenes from the run to save time anyway, so in my logic, this is just another time save for all subsequent runs moving forward. And poetically, the last person who set the record before this rule change was also the first known and confirmed run to set a new world record after this timer rule change, again from Rosin. This is also potentially the first, but probably the second run to break another minute barrier, entering into the 34 zone with a 34:06. I use words like known, confirmed, potentially, and probably here because the passage of time since the moment of the timer rule change has made things a bit ambiguous. We can see in Rosin's splits he has the current world record listed as a 34:24 by him, but at the bottom of his screen he says his current PB was a 34:10 with the new timing. When I reached out to him for clarification, we determined the truth most likely is that the 34:10 with the timing change was actually the 35:08 we just talked about, and that he achieved the 34:24 during the same gaming session he finally got this 34:06, but wasn't happy with it because the 34:24, comparing it against the established new adjusted PB time, is technically not a new world record or personal best. So he kept grinding until he got something faster than 34:10. There is no record of the 34:24 because even though it was briefly the top time in the world, it was outdated before the gamer who set it was even done playing for the day. These things happen, we already saw it with Song. Major time saves used to bring the time down this low included not getting any backup food and general cleaner gameplay, especially the movement through Hyrule Castle. He also went extremely aggressive against Calamity Ganon, really bringing the fight to this boss in a way I hadn't seen anyone else do yet during my research through all these old runs. Constantly wailing on him, giving him no room to breathe, and it was absolutely necessary because since he got poor RNG during his amiibo scans for fish, he was low on attack up time anyway, and so he finished the final hit on phase 2 right as the attack up powers wore off, dealing the final blow by shattering the Royal Claymore with a throw. In the moment, I know he had to have been aware of all this, and the heat was on. It was do or die, and so he did. The battle between Song and Rosin would go on for the next few months. Song was the one who broke the 34-minute barrier with a 33:59, using the same strats we'd seen him run since the Stasis First route had taken over, just more efficient with his execution, especially through the castle and the Blights. Rosin would answer back with the smallest shave of any new record yet, only 1 second. This run, exactly like the other one we just discussed, was so short-lived there's no saved video of it. Likely for the same reason that it happened earlier in the same session and was outdated before Rosin was done playing for the day. The only evidence it ever existed is again in the splits from the record he got on the 11th of October 2018 where we see he had a 33:58, and that's what he was running against. This run was on good pace until an extremely unfortunate time loss in Castle with taking out the Lizalfos, who had gone back to sleep while he took out the Moblin and caused further problems trying to take him out. He made up for that time loss with a better Blights fight and an excellent Calamity, beating him 4 seconds faster than he ever had before. This, however, would be the last world record to rely so heavily on stasis launches because behind the scenes, glitch hunters had been diligently messing around and their next discovery would blow people's minds. Now, some of you might think I'm about to talk about wind bombs. Maybe I threw you off by talking about blowing your mind, but I'm talking about one of the most famous or infamous, one of the most loved or loathed tricks ever seen in this game. The bullet time bounce, BTB, or bounce that boy. Simply put, it's capable of launching Link extreme distances to cover ground at incredible speeds without the need for so much weapon durability as a stasis launch, because it instead abuses the bullet time mechanic Link enters when pulling a bow and arrow while in the air, making the opportunity for significant time save, but the drawback is that it requires the help of bokoblins, so it can be inconsistent if runners don't time everything precisely enough. And when you do miss the trick, you have to reload the previous save, which is of course a significant time loss and a frustrating one at that. Song was the first runner to set a new record using the BTB with a time of 33:15 on the 25th of October 2018. Because the trick was so new, it wasn't used as much as we'll eventually come to see. Still, the first thing BTBs affected in the run was eliminating the need for 2 hammers. So Song was able to launch straight up into the cold area after completing the stasis shrine instead of stopping on the ledge for hammer number 2. The first one we'd get to see was the BTB from Cryo to Mag. He got better distance than the previously used stasis launch, but as we'll see soon enough, you can get much better results from this BTB, including the beloved unloaded Mag Shrine. We did, however, get to see the most impressive and difficult BTB in any percent's history, the Castle BTB, leaving from the Temple of Time. What makes this one so difficult is the precision needed to conserve enough stamina to get all the way to Castle. But on this run, Song only needed to get to the Sacred Ground ruins so he could pick up the Phantom Armor for the attack up in the fights. We can see from how much time he saved in the 2 splits where BTB was used that this new glitch would help bring times down dramatically, perhaps even low enough to break the sub 30 minute barrier, certainly sub 33. And 5 days later, on the eve of Halloween 2018, sub 33 is exactly what happened when Rosin got a 32:41. Rosin had his sights on sub 33 and was actively grinding with that goal in mind for a while now, before the discovery of BTBs. They just happened to make it come to fruition much sooner. Rosin optimized the route a bit by cutting straighter lines, hopping over walls, and stuff like that. But more impressively, this was the first world record to get a BTB all the way to the Magnesis Shrine fast enough to take advantage of that unloaded front door I just mentioned. So no need to clip through the side, just run on in.
And it's perfect if you land in the water here. I hit that barrel just to get more arrows, but probably later it'll be too slow.
It was always a satisfying hype moment. Anyway, on the 2nd of November 2018, Song's new record of a 32:25 would show the return of the full Banana Castle route, only seen once before in the early primitive era. Now there was no need to stop for the attack up Phantom clothing because runners would instead take their chances with the Mighty Banana RNG before heading up to the dining hall. Song got unfortunate with loads upon arrival, but was able to run through the castle in the fight strong enough to secure a new PB. After the run, Song would discuss the desire to continue improving his no amiibo time while waiting for a fellow runner to send him amiibos.
I'm not doing amiibo quite yet. I think Swiffy's gonna send me amiibos soon.
But as history would have it, this was the final time a no amiibo run would hold the #1 spot on the boards. From here, Rosin would go on an absolutely dominant 5-month streak of 8 new consecutive world records, breaking 3-minute barriers, bringing the time down to 29:32. He broke the 31-minute barrier the day before Thanksgiving 2018 in the United States, and he achieved the game's first completion in under a half hour with a 29:46 the day after New Year's Day 2019. By mid-March of that year, he had reached the 29:32. Rosin implemented many new optimizations to pull off this stretch of wins. For starters, we saw the end of box pushing for the Shrine of Resurrection scope clip and the beginning of what we see to this day with the jump on the wall running into the corner. It's so much faster and less tedious, but because Link doesn't have a stable surface to stand on, it tends to be less consistent, leading to more resets between good attempts. But there was no longer any need to grab the hammer in stasis because the other 2 BTBs we hadn't seen yet were finally possible. I'm talking about the BTB from stasis to cryo, and the BTB from mag to bombs. The Blight fight strats had improved dramatically as well, most noticeably the Fireblight Phase 2 first cycle kill before he voids out, And finally, an increase in aggression with Thunderblight Phase 1, sprinting in straight from the fade-in rather than waiting for the rush attack. Razin had also by this time begun a tradition of killing or at least shooting his horse with the Bow of Light at the end of the Dark Beast fight. It doesn't save time, and there's no real reason for it, it's just a unique trademark move that makes his runs stand out from others that much more. But the battle between Song and Razin wasn't over yet. Song would end Razin's continuous record-breaking streak on the 8th of April 2019 with a 29-10. To do this, he had to switch to Amiibo. The run actually started as a no Amiibo attempt, but when he accidentally scared away the beetle, he changed up his game plan, and so as soon as he arrived at the castle, he scanned for fish. The rest of the run went well enough to secure the low 29 time, but there would still be one more lower 29 before that minute barrier was finally broken.
Yes, dude. Let's go. Finally, good run.
Razin would get a 29.04 at the end of the same month. This was the last world record set before the release of version 1.6, the final version of the game, and the final world record set while playing on a Wii U, as both Razin and Song would eventually switch to the Switch for better loading time advantages. At this point, interest in Breath of the Wild speedrunning was at an all-time high. There was cool movement tech, and the final version update didn't patch any important stuff, which was fortunate because the established rules state all runs must be completed on the current version of the game. Not only that, but this complex Zelda game was being beaten in under a half hour by more and more people. Thus, an active and bustling community was thriving. For now, we have another influential top-tier runner to meet, and his name is Sketo Dara. Sketo's first world record was the first of several things. Coming in at 28.55, it was the first ever sub 29, and one of the ways he pulled it off was by being the first to run the Boko Shield variant of the Great Plateau. Going for the Boko Shield saves a decent amount of time because you take a straighter line straight to the second Boko camp, which is now the first Boko camp. This way of doing things was always considered a top-level runner strat because the Boko Shield has significantly less durability than the pot lid, so when setting skew to clip into shrines, it's easy to break it and not be able to finish the run. Not to mention, if you run through the cold too long, you lose too many hearts to even make it to the stasis shrine. Sketo, of course, was fine, and while making his way from the Magnesis Shrine over to bombs, this was also the first world record to feature the more difficult but more efficient way and cooler box walk stasis launch. All in all, Sketo was an efficient, clean speedrunner, and now that he had joined the top ranks, he'd spend the next year and a half in a three-way battle with Song and Razin, progressively pushing the limits of the game. Fun fact, by the way, my any percent personal best is a 28.14, so had I achieved it in the spring of 2019, it would fit right here on the list, but I digress. Throughout the summer of 2019, Sketo and Razin would trade back and forth, driving closer and closer to a sub 28-minute run. But it wouldn't be until October that this goal would be reached when another new game-breaking glitch would hit the scene. To break into the 27-minute zone with a 27.57, Razin not only had to start using the Boko Shield strategy, he had to learn how to wind bomb. Wind bombing is a technique that abuses the bullet time mechanic much like BTBs, but without the need for an NPC to bounce off. Instead, using the bomb runes to violently shove Link decently far distances super fast. They're used to gain ground both vertically and horizontally, as seen in the first wind bomb immediately after downloading the rune to get over the wall inside the shrine. But wind bombs aren't nearly as useful before you get the paraglider because you have to be sure not to die on the landing. There are many techniques these days to get different desired effects, but when they were new and much less understood, only this one wind bomb was used on the Great Plateau. We'd then see two more after collecting everything at the castle to head up to the Sanctum. This was also the last world record before Wind Blight skip became a mandatory trick, because enemy hitboxes are still active during cutscenes, so it's possible to damage them while cutscenes play. If you fire an arrow at a specific spot and then immediately enter the arena, the arrow will get stuck in Windblight's hitbox, dealing hit after hit until all the HP is gone, not only making the blights way faster, but also lessening the need for so much equipment while running through the castle to get to the fights. And the first runner to showcase the Windblight skip in a new world record would be Wohayek Song, about a month and a half later in mid-November. Looking back on this first example, we can see it just barely was enough to get the job done. But not only this, Song also threw in a new wind bomb on the Great Plateau after exiting the bomb shrine, eliminating the need to run out across the field on foot. Despite these significant time saves, Song broke the record by only 4 seconds to bring it down to 27:53. Skedodara would reclaim the record twice more in a row, bringing the time down even further to a 27:19. 2 new optimizations included doing an extended shield clip through the front door of Cryonis, and going for the Gamer Wind Bomb, which is capable of launching Link clear across the entire shrine. However, he didn't nail the trick in this run. Song would take the record back with a 27:16 on the 7th of May 2020. At this point, the Calamity Stunlock had evolved to what we see today, getting in a couple preliminary hits, starting the spin attack and sliding over to the side to set up triple hits, and then throwing that damaged weapon, switching to the claymore we picked up during phase 1, and continuing with that, then getting an extra hit in instead of throwing the weapon after every slam, until the job is done. And while we've been nerding out about the Sheikah text around Song's game border, might I point your attention one final time to how it says Wohayek Song around the border, because this was the final time Song ever got the world record. By now, the world had entered into a global pandemic, and with the extra time people had on their hands, speedrunning found a boost in popularity. At this time, breaking the 27-minute barrier was within reach and definitely a goal among the 3 top runners, but a 25 by all standards remained completely impossible. Skedo would go on to hit 4 more consecutive world records between late spring and late fall of 2020. Breaking the 27-minute barrier with a 26:54 on July 25th, which was the first time a world record had a successful gamer wind bomb, and the only time Skedo would nail the trick in a world record personal best, because he missed it in the record he set later that year on November 6th, when he finished with a 26:43. And this would be the last time he'd ever hold the world record. And with that came the end of the 3-way battle between Skedo, Song, and Rosin. Rosin would go on to push his PB lower, but the next person to snag the world record would be someone who hadn't yet. Majestic, also now known as Jesse SR, got his first and only world record on the 11th of November 2020 with a 26:43, beating Skedodara's established time by only 0.18 seconds. And he did it without the Boko shield route, a true testament to how much skill it took to do this. But he never reclaimed the top spot, which he held for 1 week and 1 day, before Rosin took it back with a 26:42. But it would be Rosin's next run, a 26:26, that holds significance, not just because the minutes match the seconds, so it's inherently cool to me again, but because this would be the last world record to use the long-standing castle route everyone was used to. Behind the scenes, the Breath of the Wild speedrunning community's desire to optimize the run even further had led to the discovery of a route through the castle based on the original ideas runners were experimenting with during the primitive era. What made it possible is how certain assets load in before others on a somewhat consistent basis. Specifically, a gate that closes off an entry from the outside lags behind most of the other things around it often enough to allow runners to simply sprint inside if they arrive fast enough. And so with an adjustment to the BTB setup leaving the Great Plateau, runners could head to the left side of the castle like they used to back in the earliest days and enter going down the stairs to a room with a moblin and 2 Lizalfos. This opened the door, pun intended, to a brand new castle route. Only needing the claymores near the moblin and completely ignoring these Lizalfos, many players would opt to scan amiibos for fish in this room, but as the game would get more optimized, they'd eventually opt to get this RNG out of the way as soon as possible by scanning right outside the first completed shrine. Anyway, players would then run up the stairs and blow up the wall to collect 3 ancient arrows for the first time in years. Then continue up the rest of the stairs to take out our old Lizalfo's friend and cook the attack up food. From here we see the first time players started using the scope clip to get out of bounds in the castle and wind bomb up to Zelda's room for the Edge of Duality, the Royal Guard's bow, and the arrows, before climbing up the bridge, wind bombing to Sanctum, and now all of these different weapons in our inventory, we also see a significant improvement in the fights, to where they actually resemble what people are used to seeing in the current, as of the time of this making of this video, strats. Especially Phase 1 Calamity, and the runner to pull all of this off in a world record for the first time, despite missing the BTB to castle and having to reload twice, was none other than Player 5. And with this performance of a 26-24, he showed a new level of what was possible with this game. Another new trick he brought into the mix that was largely overshadowed by the new castle route was the triple jump maneuver to get over the wall in Cryonis. It looks super cool, but it's also extremely tricky and doesn't save as much time as you might think it does. But either way, sub 26 was finally within reach. Knowing he could do better, 3 days later, P5 would lower the record down to a 26.06. Regardless of a slower plateau and slower fights, because this time he nailed the BTB to castle first try, which saved enough time to get within 7 seconds of breaking the 26-minute barrier. However, Player 5 would not be the first one to break this barrier, because Rosin had been practicing the new castle route for countless hours and would reclaim the world record with a 25.58 on the 19th of April 2021. Some optimizations Rosin was implementing at this time was the improved Boko manipulation to get the shield and bow with the swings of the axe at the same time. And for the Windblight skip, instead of the 4-hop technique that was standard at the time, Rosin started using a texture setup, which to the untrained eye looks like a setup list technique, but he is using a visual cue on the floor here. Before the end of the month, P5 would answer back with a 25.55, and exactly 1 week later, Rosin would bring it down 1 second to 25.54. And although both runners had their eyes on lowering their PBs down to a 25.2x, this would be Rosin's last world record run. Because from here, Player 5 would go on to a 16-time consecutive world record streak. By far the most anyone else has done in Breath of the Wild any % history at this time, and he'd hold the record for a year and 2 weeks. During this time, he would have to PB 6 times over the next 2.5 months before finally breaking the 25-minute barrier with a 24.56 on the 23rd of October 2021.
Oh my god, dude.
Funny enough, in early September of that year, another major glitch named the Bowlift Smoggle Slide, or BLSS, was discovered by Zelda glitch hunter Legend of Link. And this brings us into the current, modern era of Breath of the Wild speedrunning. The BLSS almost instantly had a gigantic impact on longer categories like all dungeons and 100%, but because it's most useful over long distances and any percent spends much of its time running around the smaller portions of the map, the Great Plateau and Inside Castle, the BTB to travel between the two was considered more efficient while BLSS hadn't yet been mastered. The 24.56 would stand through the holiday season 2021, but BLSS showed more and more promise as people experimented with potential new any % routes. And by the 2nd of January 2022, everything in the first half of the run changed forever. So after much experimentation, the new route became Bombs, Magnesis, Stasis, Cryonis. The reason being that while you can perform the BLSS with any object Link can lift, Once you have the bombs room, you can always have a liftable object at your disposal. After over 3 years of running stasis first, and always picking up the axe since before the game was even released, there was quite a bit of pushback on learning the bombs first plateau route. Getting good at the stasis first route took tons of hours of practice and dedication. BTBs, generally speaking, look cooler than BLSS in most people's opinions, and grabbing the Boko spear just seemed weird, so runners didn't want to learn it. Plus, with BLSS not yet being optimized, it seemed like a runner's choice as far as which route you'd want to run, as you wouldn't really lose time either way. That said, while learning BLSS takes a little while to get used to, once you know how to use it, getting a fast any percent time is way more user-friendly than BTBs, and as optimization of BLSS strats grew, the trick would eventually blow BTBs away as far as speed goes. So now, between BLSS and Wind Bombs, the Bombs rune was by far the most useful of the runes, and Cryonis was rendered completely useless. In this first world record set using the new Bombs first route, a 2453 by player 5, the BTB was still used to get from stasis to cryo, but this trick would eventually be phased out in favor of the BLSS again, removing BTBs from the bag of tricks completely. And of course now there would be a wind bomb inside every single shrine.
Okay.
Anyway, player 5 would lower his personal best 4 times that January, most notably getting the smallest personal best / world record improvement possible, with 1 frame of improvement going from a 2445.7 to a 2445.667. An impressive display of consistency and dedication. Still, he'd go on to PB 4 more times in February, basically setting a new world record every weekend for the first 2 months of 2022. Then there'd be a lull until mid-May when he achieved a 2415. A month after that, on the 16th of June, player 5's 16-time consecutive world record streak would be broken by a runner named Koroks, who had been rapidly improving his skills and gunning for the top spot for several months. Koroks lowered the record 5 seconds down to a 2410, or really I should say down to a 2410.167, because when player 5 would answer back about 2 months later, he'd set a new world record by 1 frame yet again, lowering the time down to a 2410.133, an insane accomplishment. At this point, both Koroks and player 5 were in a race to shave another 11 seconds off of their times to break the last minute barrier thought possible using current strats. And it would be 4 more days before it would finally happen when player 5 got the world's first sub 24 minute run with a 23:53 on August 15th. After this, P5 took a break from any percent to run other categories and wouldn't return to lower his world record until the 2nd of January 2023, when he shaved off 2 seconds to finish with a 23:51. Then, 3 months later, in April, he'd bring it down another second to 23:50. Now with some slightly optimized movement and some riskier yet faster strats. For example, more efficient movement to kill the second moblin up in Zelda's room, no longer doing the 4-hop setup and switching to a 1-hop setup for the Windblight skip shot, and a Waterblight phase 2 strategy to kill him before he has a chance to void out and go across the room. Later that month, Koroks would reclaim the world record, shaving yet another second off the current time and breaking the 23:50's second barrier down to a 23:49. This record would last about a month, until the 5th of May 2023, when player 5 ran a 23:42. This drive through the 2340s was largely spurred by a desire to see just how far Breath of the Wild any percent could be brought down before the release of Tears of the Kingdom, which would come out exactly 1 week later on May 12th. After this, almost if not everyone took a break from running Breath of the Wild to experience its long-awaited sequel. After a period of time, as players started returning to Breath of the Wild, there was a drive to achieve the 23 3x barrier. But that wouldn't happen until the 19th of March 2024 when Player 5 returned and got a 2336 using even riskier plateau strats,
I don't know, we'll see.
including a wind bomb inside the stasis shrine from farther back.
Okay, so there's this thing called...
And eliminating the stasis launch up to the cold area on the way to Cryo by using a walking square first wind bomb. Just tricky, crazy stuff. From here on, stasis is used only once with the potential to be completely eliminated with an even riskier wind bomb. Magnesis is used twice to lift up the thing on the floor in the shrine and to get the bow off the wall in Zelda's room, and Cryonis has long been dead inventory items since the start of running Bomb's first plateaus. But Player 5 didn't have his eye on a 23-3x, his goal was a 23-2x or maybe even a 23-1x. To do this, as if it wasn't already necessary to some degree, it became an absolute mandatory requirement not only to have spectacular gameplay, but to get phenomenal RNG as well. Namely, quick loads, perfect amiibo fish drops, and an instant laser from Calamity Ganon. 3 days later, he got the good loads and an instant laser to bring the record down to a 23-30. This run would have been the 23-2x he was looking for, except he missed a pre-fire during Dark Beast Ganon and lost about 2 seconds.
Okay, so when I said I would focus up, that's kind of what I was trying to avoid.
And the day after that, he got the super clean gameplay with perfect amiibo scans and quick loads, but no instant laser from Calamity.
Instant laser, please. Please, man. Okay.
Yet still managed to hit an insane time of 23:23. A beautiful time to look at, and a time that would stand for 7 months until Koroks returned for his 3rd world record the week before Halloween, lowering the time by 1 second. Enough to get the 23:22, and just like the run before, he played super clean and got good load RNG.
Bow. It loaded.
But he didn't get the instant laser from Calamity, which made all the difference between the achieved time and the would-be 23-1x. And so while this is where the current record stands for this video, we know a 23-1x is without a doubt possible, and I'll even predict will happen before the end of 2024, because there's currently a good handful of active top runners looking to lower their times, and some even believe in a 23-0x. Not only that, but the community is experiencing a re-energizing of activity. Heck, I've even been thinking about coming in to lower my time down to a 27 or something. For the longest time, a 25 was seen as impossible. Then it was seen as the peak of possibility. But then when P5 pulled off the 24, and especially after the Bomb's first route came out, 24 became the new 25. And as of today, 23 is the new 24.
Dude.
Only 6 people have achieved a 23. Still, an individual sub-23 sum of best has already been achieved, and the community sum of best as of February 2022 was a 2120. And either shortly before or after this video is published, an updated 3rd version of the best theoretical any percent time will show off what a sub-21 minute run could look like. When it's up, I'll link it in the description. So while we'll see a 23-1x sometime in the near future, and it won't be too long in the scheme of things before a 23-0x is achieved, or maybe even a 22, it'll be a little while longer before we see a sub-22 minute run or further. But I'd never go as far as to say it's impossible, because that assumption has been proven wrong throughout speedrunning history countless times. And now it's time for an any percent themed members only speedrun challenge through the fights. We're gonna see who's fastest with getting through the blights and calamity. And since we have an even number of members, this time we're breaking into 2 teams. Team Silent Princess will be Josie Crosby, Tetra Zelda, Sib, Madison White, Amro, and ZW Ral Zarek. Team Master Sword will be Prime, Nervous Bunny Gaming, Nobody, Raven Alicia, Zachary Carroll, and Wild Child. We're gonna go ahead and start off straight from the arrow shot for Windblight Skip. Good luck, everyone. May the goddess of Hylia smile upon you. And we're off. Both teams get off to a clean Windblight skip shot. Did they each hit the shot? Looks good. Looks good. Oh, yeah. See, he's shaking bad. Beautiful shot for both teams. Tied up going into Water Blight. Oh, the Master Swords get 2 hits to start it off. The Silent Princess is only 1. Getting into the spins. Ooh. Clean phase 1 for the Master Swords. Looks like missing that second hit took a toll. And we see the sword swipe wind if you look really close on the Silent Princess's team there from the jump slash into the cutscene. Cool little glitchy effect thing. All right. We're not going for the top level strats here. This is just how I know how to play the game. Getting the 2 headshots, going for the spins, 3 hits. Ooh, headshot for the Master Swords. Silent Princesses, ooh, go for the headshot and miss. That's not good, but there is a backup for that. We're gonna go for the jump slash here, it looks like. Boom, get out of here. Into Fire Blight phase 1 for the Master Swords. And now for the Silent Princesses, just behind. Barely getting that slam attack off on Fire Blight before he got away. And the Silent Princesses right behind, still going into phase 2. Let's see if anybody can get the first cycle. Kind of a tough trick here with Fire Blight. Master Swords setting it up. Oh, and he got up early and left. Oh no. Can the Silent Princesses catch up? This would be a big time save. Getting the double hits. Lost the double hits. Oh, picks up the boomerang as a backup as the Master Swords go into Thunder Blight. Silent Princesses right on their trail. Right. Both getting the double hits to set up a clean phase 1. Thunderblight, very important going into phase 2. If you mess up that throw, sending him into phase 2 while he's up in the air like that, it'll totally mess up phase 2. Virtual tie here in Thunderblight. Let's see what happens. Alright. They both get the shield break with the headshot. Another shield break and setting up the spins. Not getting good double hits here for either one. Oh no. Thunderblight got away from both of them, but he stayed close enough for the Master Swords to hit with the sword one last time. And he got away. Messed up the oh my god. I can't even express what's going on here. Oh, the Silent Princess is holding on as the Master Swords are already underway with Calamity. Grabbing the bomb arrows as the Silent Princesses just begin here. Strafing to the left, going for the Claymore, popping off the headshots. Really get the laser parry. No! Oh my god! And the Silent Princesses are being chased instead of getting the laser set up from Calamity. What? Ah! Alright, missing headshots with the Master Sword, but getting the laser parry. Looks like we're going off the plans here with the Silent Princesses, because now we get the laser parry, and all this RNG is messed up. Going for the spins, it looks like they're tied, but the Silent Princesses actually have a lot of work to do here. Switching to the Ancient Arrows. Calamity's on the wall for the Master Swords. What is going on here? Pops off the last Ancient Arrow. Was missing some headshots there. Ooh, the Silent Princesses decide to not go for the laser parry in favor of firing more arrows. While you got them, use them while you got them. Boomerang back up with the Master Swords to send Calamity into phase 2 while Calamity goes on the wall for the Silent Princesses. What? All right, phase 2 going completely not the way you want it to here for the Master Swords. This is not good. Oh my god. Both of them getting Calamity off the wall. Silent Princess is sending him into phase 2 now. While the Master Swords go to set up the stun lock, this could be it unless they have a bad spin and we get instant laser. We don't get instant laser, and it looks almost like the same Calamity fight here. Oh my god. If he goes up on the wall, I'm going to lose it. All right, they're setting up the stun lock. Both teams in the stun lock. Getting up on the wall, phase 2 for the Master Swords lost a lot of time, but they do look like they're slightly in the lead, and as long as everyone holds their nerves, the Master Swords could pull this one out. Pun intended. Double entendre, actually, when you think about it. Hey, but the Silent Princesses are having some decent spins. All right, looks like the Master Swords won this match. Holy crap. That was crazy. We'll let the Silent Princesses finish these spins out. GG's, everyone. Wow. I appreciate y'all being here with me for the crazy ride of a story that is Breath of the Wild Any% history. More than I can say. If you've watched this far, please like the video. It's a simple, free gesture that helps me a ton by helping get this video to other like-minded Zelda enthusiasts and speedrunners alike. And if you want me to make a return to Any% to grind my time below 28 minutes, let me know in the comments by leaving a 27 somewhere in there. And make sure to subscribe so you can catch all my upcoming Zelda content. Until then, stay cool and always keep punching out there. Aloha.